Greetings and welcome to Domicile, Acquisition, Establishment, Abandonment, and Change from American Jurisprudence. Let's get started. So, we're going to be going over Domicile from 2nd edition American Jurisprudence, and here's a summary and the scope of the article. This article discusses the nature of domicile, the acquisition, establishment, abandonment, and change of domicile, and domicile in relation to particular places and persons. It also examines proof and evidence regarding domicile, and aspects of trial and judgment with regard to domicile. Federal aspects. The definition of residence and general abode under federal immigration law is discussed in this article. Domicile of a federal prisoner for purposes of for federal diversity jurisdiction purposes is discussed in another article. See AmJur, 2nd edition, Federal Courts, section 777. This is an interesting thing not to be overlooked. Domicile of a federal prisoner for purposes of for federal diversity jurisdiction. It's an interesting concept here. Purposes. Federal diversity jurisdiction purposes. And that's discussed in another article which we might have to look at a future date. And that's section 777, buried deep within it. Residency requirements with regard to federal elections is also discussed elsewhere. Also discussed in other articles are resident requirements for eligibility to hold the office of clerk of a federal district court, and domicile or residence as requirement for filing for bankruptcy. For U.S. Code references, see statutory references below, and treated elsewhere is there. And before we go any further, remember this is a broadcast strictly for your entertainment educational purposes on this YouTube channel, not to be used, construed for any professional, personal, legal, lawful, financial, tax, or otherwise. Don't do this at home. Okay, let's get started here with general definition, section 1. Derived from the Latin domus, meaning dwelling, house, or home. The word domicile refers to the place where an individual has a true, fixed, and permanent home, to which he or she intends to return whenever he or she is absent. Domicile is a relationship that the law creates between an individual and a particular locality or country. It may or may not be synonymous with residence, so domicile may or may not be synonymous with residence. For purposes of diversity jurisdiction, domicile may be coextensive with citizenship. Diversity jurisdiction, citizenship. But one's domicile in national citizenship may differ in other contexts. When a court must determine domicile in order to apply a federal statute, the term is defined with reference to congressional intent. Observation. The overall concept of domicile may have different content and shades of meaning depending upon the context in which it is used. Generally, domicile consists of two elements: residence and intent to remain. As stated otherwise, domicile has two components: an actual residence in a particular jurisdiction and an intention to make a permanent home in the jurisdiction. All right, I just noticed here in the chat, we got Joe Cool in the house. Greetings to you, legend. Always definitely a privilege to have you here with us tonight, and would appreciate any of your input here in the chat as we move forward. As you notice here, this highlighted section here where we're speaking generally. And again, this is generally and the definition of domicile. But this is particularly the legal elements of it here when they talk about this. It generally consists of two elements: residence, which we read earlier that it may or not be synonymous with residence. So it generally consists of two elements, one of which being residence. And one says intent to remain. So this looks a little bit more as it would be more than just general, but more as a fundamental element, as an intent to remain or to return whenever one is absent. Okay, let's continue on. We have here some footnotes of various case holdings. Let's see. A domicile is a person's principal domestic establishment, as contrasted to a business establishment. As definition of home, see section 10, which we will be at shortly. These sections move rather fast because they are brief and to the point. So let's see, no other things, just the citations here. The words reside or resident mean domicile unless a contrary intent is shown. So this is where it may not be an element of domicile, when a contrary intent is shown. And that's from 2002. It's like Maryland. I won't say the name. Let's see what else we have here. Involving the running of the statute of limitations against residents. So some of the legal things here. Here we go. Any place of abode or dwelling place constitutes a residence, however temporary it may be, while the term domicile relates to the legal residence of a person or his home in contemplation of law. Wow, the legal residence in contemplation of law. As a result, one may be a resident of one jurisdiction, although having a domicile in another. Nice, and that's from the Florida District Court of Appeals in 2001. Residence, though parallel in many respects to domicile, is something quite different in the elements of permanency, continuity, and kinship with the physical, cultural, social, and political attributes that inhere in a home are missing. Wow. That's Santee versus State Farm Insurance in New Jersey, 2000. The distinction between domicile and residence is that residence is a physical fact, while domicile is a matter of intention. Now that's beautiful. Domicile and residence are not synonymous, except in the context of election laws and laws pertaining to jurisdiction in divorce actions. Phew. Thus, a person may have several residences, but only one domicile. As the definition of residence, see section 8, which we shall be at shortly. And let's see here. As to diversity jurisdiction, federal courts, we got to look into this a little bit more. 470, 708, and 708 to 1034. Wow. And they mentioned 777 earlier. The term citizen, used in the definition of domicile, is not synonymous with citizenship of the United States. Wow. As to the definition of citizenship, see section 3, which we'll be at shortly. And as to the choice of law principles, we'll also see section 3. And this one here, as to 25 U.S. Code, section 1911A, dealing with the Indian Tribal Court's jurisdiction over a child custody proceeding involving an Indian child residing or domiciled within the reservation of the tribe. Oh, gosh. Well, we're not going to go over that one tonight, so let's proceed here. Domicile requires both physical presence in a place and the intent to make that place one's home. So it's both the physical presence and the intent to make that place one's home. All right, we're on to section 2, necessity and singularity of domicile. It is a fundamental legal rule that every person has a domicile at all times. Ooh, a fundamental legal rule. Equally fundamental is a principle that no person has more than one domicile at any one time, even if a person may have one or several actual physical residences. When a person with capacity to acquire a domicile of choice has more than one dwelling place, his domicile is in the earlier dwelling place, unless the second dwelling place is his principal home. So they catch you by order. First place you're in is your domicile, no matter how many you get, until you make the second one or subsequent one a principal home, it seems. Every person has a domicile at all times. Restatement of the second conflict of laws. Nice. Everyone has a domicile, and that domicile is not lost until a new domicile is actually acquired. So, are we kind of capturing this concept of domicile? It's a concept in law that means an intent to be in one place and to return to that place. And even if it's a changing place, it's only one at a time, and it remains until it is replaced with a new one. Although one may be legally domiciled in different places for different legal purposes, a person is deemed to have only a single domicile for that particular legal purpose for which the concept is then being used. Again, between the legal and the lawful legal purposes, but again, it depends on the context. No person has more than one domicile at a time. All right, let's move along here. A person may legally reside in more than one state while being legally domiciled in only one state. Oh, we missed another restatement here? No, okay, just as a definition. Okay. All right, let's check back over in the chat before we get over to section 3 here. Refresh the chat, see if anyone else has piped up in here. Hope everyone's having fun learning about this distinctions here of some common terms that we may come across in our day-to-day experiences that might have a more profound meaning than we previously thought, both involving legal matters and in the law. Let's continue. Section 3, Law Governing Determination. Generally, the question of domicile is to be determined by the law of the forum state, including choice of law principles. Federal common law controls the determination of domicile. Federal common law controls the determination of domicile for purposes of purported diversity jurisdiction. While useful, choice of law principles developed in a forum state will not determine the outcome. While useful. When a court must determine domicile in order to apply a federal statute, the term is defined with reference to congressional intent. In the absence of a congressional definition, federal courts may draw on the general principles of state law in order to determine the applicable law, if those principles are consistent with the policy of the statute in question. Interesting. So the forum determines the domicile according to its own standards. And the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians versus Holyfield, interpreting domicile for the purposes of jurisdictional provisions of the Indian Child Welfare Act, dealing with an Indian tribal court's jurisdiction over a child custody proceeding involving the same one we read about before here, huh? That must be an important case here, and that was, didn't have the case here. It'll have to be in this section 145 of the AmJur on Indians. All right, we're on to section 4, generally. The three types of domicile are domicile of origin, domicile of choice, and domicile by operation of law. Depending upon the laws to be construed or the question involved, domicile may also be classified as domestic or foreign, national, state, county, or municipal. Depending upon the laws to be construed or the questions involved. So we have three general types: origin, choice, and operation of law. But then, depending upon the laws to be construed, those operation of law could be also classified as domestic, foreign, national, state, county, or municipal, it seems. All right, let's proceed. Section 5, domicile of origin. So the first type. A domicile of origin is acquired by every person at birth and continues until replaced by the acquisition of another domicile. It is the domicile of the child's parents or of the persons upon whom the child is legally dependent at birth. Observation. Although also referred to as domicile of birth, domicile of origin is the domicile of one's parents at the time of birth. It may not necessarily be the actual place of one's birth. And I think that would apply sometimes here in on America if someone is serving overseas and they have childbirth overseas, that the domicile would still be at their home in the United States of America, even though they might be overseas in a foreign land, and the child was born physically in that actual foreign land. That might be one case here. Let's see here. If domicile of origin is a domicile which a person has at birth, and that's restatement second, conflict of laws. All right, and we're on to section 6, domicile of choice, the second type. A domicile of choice is a domicile chosen by a person to replace his or her former domicile. To replace. Observation. The choice involves an exercise of free will and presumes the legal capacity to make a choice. Domicile of choice generally consists of a bodily presence in a particular locality and a concurrent intent to remain there permanently, or at least indefinitely. Caution. While intention is a principal feature of domicile of choice, a mere intention without the fact of an actual presence in the locality cannot bring about acquisition of a new domicile. So you can't just say your domicile is on Mars. You would actually have to be there. If there is a concurrence of the fact of physical presence at the particular place and the existence of the required attitude of mind, in addition to the requisite legal capacity, a change of domicile takes place. Domicile of choice may be acquired by a person who is legally capable of changing his domicile. As to the capacity of particular persons to acquire domicile, see sections 27 to 50. Oh boy. To acquire a domicile of choice in a place, a person must intend to make that place his home for the time at least. For the time at least. The time. All right, we're on to section 7. Domicile by operation of law. A domicile by operation of law is a domicile that the law attributes to a person independently of the person's residence or intention. It applies to infants, incompetents, and other persons under disabilities that prevent them from acquiring a domicile of choice. Wow. Intention. Independent of the person's residence or intention. It applies to infants, incompetents, and other persons under disabilities that prevent them from acquiring a domicile of choice. District of Columbia comes to mind. As to residence as fixing domicile, as the intention concerning a permanent abode. So we have a few more sections here to get to. Let's continue. Section 8, residence, definition, and distinctions generally. And let's check on over at the chat and see refresh it and see if anyone's hopped up into the room here. Oh boy, taking a while to refresh there. Not a good sign. Joe Cool, and please hit the like if you are in here and make sure we get the word out. Not sure if the notifications went out well tonight. That being said, let's proceed. So we're on Section 8, the residence definition and distinctions. As distinguished from a fixed habitation, residence generally refers to an attachment to a place that is temporary, impermanent, or transient. The term residence imports having merely an abode at a particular place, which may be one of several places where one is physically present from time to time. On the other hand, it has sometimes been stated that a residence is a person's fixed place of habitation, from which the person has no present intention of moving. Residence may or may not be synonymous with domicile. A chameleon-like concept, it has been said that residence is something more than a mere physical presence, and something less than a domicile. It has been stated, in distinguishing between domicile and residence, that domicile involves the intent of an individual, while residence is a matter of objective fact. Federal immigration law defines residence as a place of general abode, which is a person's principal, actual dwelling place, without regard to intent. Domicile means a permanent place of abode, whereas residence is not necessarily permanent. It may be at some place other than the place of domicile. Generally, residence is the result of or achieved by a person's physical presence, and living at a location does not require an intention to stay permanently in the location. All right, let's proceed here. And we're on to Section 9, legal residence, actual residence. The law sometimes equates legal residence with domicile while using actual residence to refer to one's present physical location. So here's a little distinction that you might find in the legal realm. The law sometimes equates legal residence with domicile while using actual residence to refer to one's present physical location. Not necessarily the one with intent, but the objective fact of where someone is presently. All right. Hope you're getting the swing of this American jurisprudence, the way they attack a concept from many different angles, a multifaceted approach, so it really crystallizes in your mind the understanding of these concepts at a deep level that you're able to apply them in a matter of logical thinking and principles of law, hopefully. So let's proceed. Section 10, home. Home is the place where a person dwells, and which is the center of his domestic, social, and civil life. Although sometimes used synonymously, one may abandon a home or move to other quarters after a home is destroyed without changing domicile. Interesting. It's a place where a person dwells and which is the center of his domestic, social, and civil life. Although sometimes used synonymously, one may abandon a home or move to other quarters after a home is destroyed without changing domicile. Intent to come back. Wow, interesting. A person's domicile is ordinarily the place where he or she has his home. Moreover, it is the place the law recognizes as defining a person's status for census purposes and voter registration. A person's domicile is a permanent home from which he or she does not intend to move. So now it's starting to make more sense here. Census purposes. You don't want to count people twice having more than one domicile. All right, we're on to Section 11, abode. While some authority construes the term abode as synonymous with domicile, it has also been said that abode generally differs from domicile. Under this view, abode is a more restricted term that denotes a place where a person actually lives. With respect to occupancy, it is less permanent than domicile. While permitted to have only one domicile, a person may have several abodes. Okay. So that's a big distinction right there. Construction of the phrase, usual place of abode, or similar terms referring to abode, residence, or domicile, as used in statutes relating to service of process. See 32 American Law Review. Okay, nice. All right, let's proceed. We're on to section 12. Citizenship. Yeah, let's pop on over the chat here. Not sure if my chat's refreshing, but it looks like there's nothing in the chat. Here we go. Excellent. Captain Jack, welcome aboard. To an abode in a government domicile. Well, it seems that if you're an infant or incompetent, that the government could choose your domicile for you. Regardless of your intent. But what is it when you're in the sea? That's the question. Maybe we'll get to that soon. Section 12, citizenship. When used to refer to a person's relationship to one of the states of the United States, citizenship is generally synonymous with domicile, whether for the purposes of determining jurisdiction of a federal court, for the purpose of determining jurisdiction of state courts over divorce or alimony actions, or for any other purpose. When used in the sense of nationality, or to refer to a person's relationship to a country, however, citizenship may not be the same as domicile. One may be domiciled in one country while a citizen of another. Yeah, and then there's dual citizenship. We can't have dual domicile. Let's see, as to aliens and citizens, let's see aliens and citizens. Inheritance tax, special factors in the domiciliary status of aliens. Right, we're on to section 13. Inhabitancy or habitation. Inhabitancy is equivalent to domicile. Unless that meaning is inconsistent with legislative intent. So if they've defined something else for inhabitancy, then that would change the legislative intent of that meaning. The term habitation signifies an abode for the moment and is merely a component of the concept of domicile. Habitation is merely a component of the concept of domicile, while inhabitancy is equivalent to domicile. Wow, seems like it'd be the same word, but putting that in front of it makes it equivalent to domicile, while just habitation is merely a component of the concept of domicile. And still, inhabitancy can't be used synonymously if there's some legislative definition that contradicts it. Right, we're moving along here. Let's see here. Section 14, generally, physical presence or residence intention. Generally, one must be physically present or actually reside in a place in order to acquire a domicile of choice there. In this regard, in order to acquire a domicile by choice, these essentials must concur at the same time: residence, bodily presence in a new locality, and 2, an intention there to remain. In other words, there must be a concurrence of the fact and the intent. So you get that? A concurrence, both occurring at the same time together. Intent and fact. So long as the residence is actual, the character of the living quarters is immaterial. And even the quarters that are normally temporary will qualify. Thus, the dwelling may be a temporary shack, a rented house, a boarding house, a hotel, or the house of a relative or friend. So this is a domicile of choice. 3 essentials: residence, bodily presence, and intention there to remain. And where's our third? They said 3, didn't they? 3 essentials must occur: residence in the new locality and 2. That's 2. Let me read this again. Did I miss something? Anyone that's watching can pipe up in the chat. 1 must be physically present or actually reside to acquire a domicile of choice. In this regard, in order to acquire a domicile by choice, these. I gotta make this bigger. These essentials: residence, bodily presence in the new locality, and 2, an intention there to remain. So this fact and intent. I'll edit that part out later. Okay, in other words, there must be a concurrence of the fact and the intent. So long as the residence is actual, the character of the living quarters is immaterial. We get that. Observation: domicile may be predicated upon the presence within the state and the requisite intent to make a home there, even if the person has selected no particular locality in the state as a home. Now that's quite interesting. Wow, Ex parte Phillips, Alabama, 1963 is a definition of domicile of choice. We went over that already in section 6. Domicile is established when there is a good faith intention to establish a particular residence as a permanent home, coupled with the physical move to the new residence as evidenced by positive, overt facts. And the concept of domicile involves concurrence, physical presence. Okay, so we got this. We read this already. Okay, here's the other part of it, though. The acquisition of new domicile is generally understood to require an actual change of residence accompanied by the intention to remain either permanently or for an indefinite time without any fixed or certain purpose to return to the former place of abode. Okay, let's proceed. Establishment of a home in a particular dwelling is not necessary for the acquisition of a domicile in a particular dwelling. So I guess you could hang a hammock between some trees and say it's your domicile. Oh, Edward Sawicki says, got the 30-minute countdown text. 30-minute countdown. Didn't know we had one of those. All right. So he has a supplement here. The cases. To change domicile, there must be a relocation to the new residence and continued dwelling there, coupled with an intention of remaining there indefinitely. Neither physical presence alone nor intention alone is sufficient to effectuate a change of domicile. All right. And we're moving along to section 15, duration of residence. Duration of residence. And before we get to that, let's check into the chat once again. MTV's Rich and Famous Domiciles. Domiciles of the Rich and Famous. Yeah, that could be a good... the 30-minute notification. I didn't even realize those things were going out. That's good to know. I'll make sure. This was kind of an ad hoc presentation, so Perhaps it might have been within that 30-minute window. Nevertheless, I appreciate everyone that's here to participate. Any questions or any details you'd like to add, please pipe up in the chat, and we'll bring it forward here for everyone to share. We're on Section 15, duration of residence. As long as a physical presence in the locality and an intention to acquire a domicile there occur concurrently. That's a concurrent occurrence. The length of residence is not a factor in the establishment of a domicile. No definite period of time is necessary to create a domicile unless the law of the jurisdiction provides otherwise. Any period of residence, however short, will suffice when coupled with intent. An individual need only be present for a moment. Furthermore, the habitation need not be continuous or uninterrupted, since temporary absences do not affect domicile. A domicile, once established, continues until it is superseded by a new domicile. Wow. As it requires the, oh boy. Oh, okay, residence for jurisdiction divorce action. In the absence of any constitutional or statutory requirement in regard to domicile, the length of the residence is immaterial, provided the other elements are found to exist. Domicile can be changed quickly if the requisite intent is present. All right, that brings us on to Section 16 generally. In order to abandon a domicile, a person must choose a new domicile, actually reside in the place chosen, and intend that it be his or her principal and permanent residence. An intention to abandon an established domicile and the actual abandonment of it are necessary but not sufficient for the acquisition of a new domicile. An existing domicile cannot be lost by abandonment alone, even if there is an intent to acquire a new one. The existing domicile continues until a new one is in fact gained. Wow, so now this is a very important principle of law that you can't just change a domicile without abandoning another one. And just abandonment alone is not enough for the intent. You need to actually reside in the new one first before you can establish a new domicile, it seems here. Oh, in order to abandon. So no, okay, so you can't abandon a domicile until you choose a new one. And actually reside in the place chosen and intended to be your principal place or permanent residence. Wow, so you have to actually physically move out and then it's abandoned. Interesting. Yeah, so I guess the term here is abandon. In order to abandon a domicile, a person must choose. An existing cannot be lost by abandonment alone. That's interesting how they use the word abandonment here, but in order to abandon. But it can't be done by abandonment alone, but we're trying to abandon something. To abandon it, it's not just abandonment, it's abandonment and choosing a new one. So I guess abandonment's more or less of a synecdoche of this concept here. Holding that reunification of one home is not sufficient as a change of domicile without the acquisition of another. Wow. All right, we're on to Section 17 generally. Before we do that, let's check over to the chat here. Captain Jack says, like when a snail loses its shell. Interesting. Yes. It's always going to have a new shell, so you can't really fully abandon that shell until you get a new one, because you can always go back into that shell, right? So to speak. It's not going to survive very long without another shell either. You're not going to make it overnight as a snail. Excellent concept. Thanks. That's what we do here. Try to encourage a little bit of deeper thought into these concepts. So, Section 17, generally. An adult may change his or her domicile at will. To effectuate a change in domicile, the law requires that both residency and the intent to sustain that residency coexist. No change of domicile will result in the absence of one of these elements. Thus, an intention to acquire a domicile without actual residence in the locality does not result in the acquisition of domicile, nor does the fact of physical presence without an intention to acquire a domicile result in domicile. While a very short period of residence in a place may establish a domicile, mere residence, regardless of how prolonged, is insufficient without an intention to make the place a permanent residence or home. The intent need not, however, develop at the same time as a physical move to a new location. A subsequent concurrence of physical presence and an intent to adopt the locality as a domicile is sufficient. Remember, they have to be the concurrence, coexisting, occurring at the same time. Let's see here. Observation following the change of a domicile. When the new domicile is established, it persists until another is legally acquired. They really want you to hold on to that domicile. For a change of domicile to occur, the fact of physical presence at a dwelling place and the intention to make it a home must concur. In absence of either of 1. Residence, bodily presence in the new locality, and 2. An intention to remain there, thwarts the change in domicile. Absence of either of those elements. Plaintiff's domicile would not change from Florida to Connecticut as a result of his formation of unimplemented intent to move to Connecticut. Domicile would not change until plaintiff was also physically present in Connecticut. 1998. As to physical presence required to establish a domicile of choice, see Section 14, which we did, and as to the intention required to establish a domicile of choice, see Sections 19 to 23. That's what we're about to get to right now. I'm going to check back over to the chat before we get on to Section 18, preliminary steps towards relocation. Yeah. Deep thoughts with Captain Jack, indeed. We're going deep. It would be a sub, though, wouldn't it? So a domicile is only in a state. For legal purposes, as we read before, it could be a state, a municipality, a county, a country. It could be a lot of different ways when it's a legal domicile. But then you have your domicile of choice, and domicile of origin. So out of those three, the domicile in the state would be the domicile by law, I believe. Let's move ahead. On to preliminary steps towards relocation. Because one must be physically present in a place in order to acquire a domicile there, some courts hold that preliminary steps of a move do not alone establish a change of domicile. Some courts, however, have reached a contrary result. Oh, great. Depending where you are, you got Keating versus Keating in North Dakota in 1987. Then you got Leah versus Leah, holding that a man residing outside a state who asked his spouse to establish a home within the state established the state as the family's domicile in the absence of proof of a contrary genuine intention. Yikes. Acquisition of domicile by sending wife or family to new home. We're on to Section 19, Nature of Intention. The change in domicile depends in large part on whether or not the person intends to make the new place a legal residence and thereby acquire a new domicile to the exclusion of the previous domicile. So you got to exclude that previous domicile along with your intent to make it a new legal resident. The person seeking to establish a new domicile must intend not simply to acquire the legal status of a domiciliary in the new jurisdiction, but must intend to make the new place a home in fact. Observation. Generally, it is the intention at the time of arrival at the new residence which is important. The fact that one later acquires doubts about remaining in the new home or is called upon to leave it is not relevant, unless the subsequent doubt or the circumstances of leaving indicate that no intention to make the domicile in the place ever existed. So I guess would be the order that I see that makes the time of arrival, which is important. The intention at the time of arrival. So at the time of arrival, you're saying, there's no way I'm staying here. Then that didn't establish intent. The intent to change one's domicile must include an intention to abandon the former domicile permanently or indefinitely. If a person establishes a new dwelling place but retains an intention to return to the old dwelling place as his or her only home, the domicile remains at the old dwelling place. There must be both an intent to remain in the place chosen as the new domicile and an absence of intent to return to the old domicile. The intention to remain in the new place must be accompanied by an act demonstrating the intention. In addition, the intention must be objectively reasonable. Of course, the essential fact that raises a change of abode to a change of domicile is the absence of any intention to live elsewhere. A non-resident unwed mother's visits to Florida during an off-and-on relationship with her child's father were insufficient to prove a settled intention to make Florida her permanent home, such that Florida lacked personal jurisdiction over the mother with respect to paternity and custody proceeding brought by the father. Jeez. Interesting, a lot of these cases involve divorce and such, involving domicile. Abandonment, we went over that. And we're on to Section 20, the intended duration of residence. An interesting concept here. And we saw how this is playing in with immigrants, residency and domicile. And the domicile requires intent, and the residency doesn't. So, as you see, the term residence used quite frequently involving immigrants, yet you rarely hear domicile or domiciliary. All right. Intended duration of residence. When a person lives in a particular location, in the sense that he or she merely subsists there for a while, the person has not necessarily established a domicile there. The intent necessary to establish domicile is an intent to remain in one's new place of residence, either permanently or for an indefinite period of time. Observation: the person need not intend to remain for all time, and an intention to remain for an indefinite period suffices. For all time, just a time. Indefinite. The element of permanency should not be arbitrarily measured by any mere yardstick of time, but rather by the actor's intent, as reflected by the nature and purpose of his or her conduct. As the effect of a floating intention to return to a former domicile, see Section 22. We'll have to get to that, the floating intention. I don't think they're speaking about watercraft there, Captain Jack. And to acquire domicile of choice in a place, a person must intend to make that place his home, for the time at least. For the time at least. All right, and it takes us to Section 21, conditional intention. Yes, bust over here to the chat real quick and see if any other comments. And it looks like we're caught up. Excellent. Conditional intention. For domicile purposes, the intention to make a new home must be unqualified and not conditioned on the happening of a future event. Observation: if one leaves to seek employment and intends to change his or her residence only after finding employment, there is no loss of domicile. Moreover, employment at a particular place does not bring about a change of domicile if the intention to remain at that place is contingent upon the permanency of the employment. Permanency of employment. All right. Here we are. My favorite part here, section 22, floating intention. The intention to return at some indefinite future time to a former place of abode, commonly called a floating intention, does not destroy present domicile. Place of abode. If a person has actually moved to a new abode with the intention of remaining there for an indefinite time and establishing it as a fixed present domicile, that place is to be deemed as a person's domicile, notwithstanding he or she may entertain a floating intention to return to his or her former domicile at some future time. The floating intention. This is nice. Does not destroy present domicile because you plan to go back, perhaps, at some future time. All right, and we're on to section 23, effective motive. Given the intention to change domicile, the motive of the person purporting to change his or her domicile is immaterial. Wow, the motive is immaterial, just the intention matters. Thus, a change of residence motivated by self-interest does not prevent a change of domicile. In particular, a change in domicile is not affected by the fact that the change is designed to defeat the exercise of federal diversity jurisdiction. Whoa! Is not affected by the fact that the change is designed to. So, a change in domicile is not affected if it's used to defeat the exercise of federal diversity jurisdiction or create diversity jurisdiction. Wow. Secure lower taxes. Take advantage of less stringent divorce laws. Have one's will proved and estate settled in one county rather than another. Carry on an adulterous relationship and take advantage of in-state tuition rates. Whoa, hang on. Given an intention to change domicile, the motive of the person purporting to change is immaterial. So all these things are okay for intention to change domicile. Even because I'm changing it to carry on an adulterous relationship or take advantage of in-state tuitions, have a will approved in another county, take advantage of less stringent divorce laws, even to secure lower taxes. Remember, nothing in this presentation is to be construed or used for anything legal, lawful, tax-wise, professional, or financial, and please don't do this at home. Definitely don't take this as relationship advice either in here, because this is strictly with some of the more, let's just say, less desirable outcomes. And it takes us on to section 24 generally. And before we do that, let's pop over to the chat. Get a boat with floating intentions. Now, how do you get floating intentions for a domicile if you're on a houseboat? A houseboat abode. Abode a boat. Aboard a boat abode. And L.A. Spike, greetings to you. And he's got the notepad and the Esquire pencil ready. All right, let's continue here. Section 24 generally. A person's domicile in a state does not depend on a continuous presence in the state and is not dissolved by a mere absence from a state One does not lose one's domicile by mere physical presence elsewhere, unless that presence is accompanied by an intention to abandon the old residence and adopt the new. Caution: if intended as a permanent abandonment, the shortest absence can be an abandonment of a domicile, even if the person promptly changes his or her intention. So, as domicile affected by residence in a foreign country, see Section 51. And removal of one's domiciliary jurisdiction without the intent to change one's domicile is insufficient. All right, so give a little refresh here to the chat. And, oh, geez. There we go. Okay. We're on to Section 25. Temporary absence. A person does not abandon his or her established domicile by leaving it for a period, if he or she genuinely intends to return and not to acquire a domicile elsewhere. If domicile has once existed, mere temporary absence will not destroy it, however long it continued. Thus, a temporary relocation away from one's established domicile does not result in a change of domicile without proof of intent to establish domicile elsewhere. Wow. Temporary removal or absence from one domicile with intent to return there will not suffice to establish a new domicile. If a person temporarily leaves a legal domicile or leaves for a particular purpose and does not take up permanent residence somewhere else, then that person's legal domicile has not changed. You have Section 26, removal for health reasons. Wow. The change in residence in order to benefit one's health does not usually change one's domicile. Such a change is less than a change of domicile, even though the actual time spent in the new residence may be long, and even though the person is aware that his or her illness will prevent a return to the domicile. It's not usually. Residence in a nursing home in another parish is not alone sufficient to change domicile. That must be Louisiana, yes. Okay. All right. Section 27, persons in transit. Yes, please hit the like. Get this word out there and let's continue. So, persons in transit. Since a domicile once established continues until a new one is acquired by concurrent intent and physical presence, a person who is in transit to a new domicile retains his or her old domicile until the new one is reached. This rule applies to changes from one country to another, from one state to another, and from one county or town to another county or town in the same state. However, there is also contrary authority. So, person transit, let's see, until the new one is reached. Wow. So while you're sailing from one domicile to the other, the old domicile remains and as the domicile. But what if your domicile is the boat? Contrary authority. Let's see what that could be. Disapproved on other grounds. Here we go. The state of Galata, South Dakota, 1999. A former wife intended to make South Dakota the permanent home of her and her children, and thus a child domiciled in South Dakota at the time of her death, where the wife had been awarded legal custody of the child in the divorce. The wife and children had vacated their home in Maryland and were en route to a new home in South Dakota at the time of the child's death. And 3, the wife had all the family's belongings shipped to South Dakota and had obtained employment and a place to live there. How this one rules, section, footnote 6. That's the contrary Ah, so she had full intent. Her stuff was sent over there. Let's see here. She'd been legal custody. Okay, so she had the child. Okay, so the child was died. The child at the time of her death. So the her is the child. And the wife, the child. But the wife was awarded legal custody of the child. The wife and the child had vacated the Maryland home and were en route to South Dakota at the time of the child's death. And the wife had all the family's belongings shipped, so there's no more belongings back there. And she had employment and a place to live there. So even though they weren't physically there yet, we're considering the dead child was domiciled there. Wow. So that's because they were in transit with full intention. Let's see here. Established 2-1. Okay, so however, this is also contrary authority. So if you're in South Dakota, that transit means that there could be an exception, at least legally, where you wouldn't have to physically be at the other location. Wow. Well, that's a twist. Pretty morbid twist in there. And we're on to soldiers and military personnel. I think we're kind of towards the end of the readings for tonight. Yeah, we're done here. We're going to get to the more, we say, the fringe elements of it. But this has been a great reading here. I got to salute Captain Jack for sure for coming in and throwing in those little tidbits there that helped keep us on track. In, at, or on that state. Well, in transit is in between. Interesting. So we're thinking about coming all aboard the abode on the boat. And if you're in transit from one port to the next, where's your domicile would be the pending question for the night. Other than that, I think that we really attacked this rather well. We did a good long deep dive into domicile and the acquisition, the establishment, abandonment, and change. And I think we delved into it enough to know the distinctions between abode, residence, and domicile, where it applies, who it applies to, and how it can change, and in what context you might need to come back to these concepts and elements to prove it or to exercise the benefits or the establishment of it. That being said, I want to salute you all for coming out and joining me on this expedition into domicile, and I hope to see you all on the next one. Peace out.